A lot of us who pay attention to politics seem to be stuck in this current position of, well, what the hell should we even do? Democracies across the world are struggling with authoritarian backsliding. And really, in all places and across all times, it seems that democracies primarily end up benefiting classes of idle rich people and resulting in societies with massive wealth inequality. Why is that? You'd expect at least one democracy to, I don't know, over distribute wealth to primarily families or working people or something. Why hasn't that happened? I believe that the reason is that elections are actually for elites. They have nothing to do with democracy. They are aristocratic. A few years ago, I was introduced to the idea of sortition, and I believe that sortition is the fundamental reform that will make all other worthwhile reforms possible. I'm going to read you a pamphlet about calling a recurring set of constitutional conventions based on multi-body sortition, a specific sortition proposal by Terry Beretius. I am going to be reading you this pamphlet, and I'm also going to be taking you on a tour of public access old political cartoons so that we can all appreciate just how long people like us have been fighting the same damn battle. Hope you enjoy. The People's Convention. Our government cannot be trusted. It is not of, by, or for us. We are ruled by the rich, in a society where gatekeeping and gambling pay more than working, and one of the most important determinants of success is how much money your parents have. We are ruled by corporations that are incentivized to operate with no regard for human well being or the safety of our land, water, or air. We are facing a future of climate fueled mass migration, conflict, and death, where technology will increasingly raise the stakes of war, erode our privacy, and strip away the bargaining power of workers. Right now, the system we use to pick our decision makers favors risk takers who disproportionately benefit from the status quo. By the time politicians see that drastic changes must be made to save their families, we are worried it will be too late for our families. Change is coming whether we like it or not, and governments will have to adapt. The question before us is, who should get to reshape our government? Elites and politicians who benefit from keeping things as they are? Privileged revolutionaries willing to cause some collateral damage? Or we the people? We may wish we didn't have to live through such times, but we have a responsibility to everyone who comes after us to do our best to close the gap between who currently controls this country and who should. If we want a government of, by, and for the people, but we can't involve everyone in every decision, we can select short term, representative samples of the public, give them the resources they need, and then let them decide. This is called sortition, selecting decision makers by sampling the people. When a scientist needs to understand a complex system or a cook wants to know what a soup tastes like, we know they can get good information by taking samples. This is common sense and is also supported by enormous amounts of scientific progress. We already trust samples of citizens on juries to decide life and death issues every day, and within the last few decades, sortition-based citizens' assemblies around the world have demonstrated their competence in handling even the most complicated and divisive policy subjects time and again. Elections limit regular people's input to picking from a list of viable middlemen, pre-selected by corporations and wealthy donors to limit the range of debate. Sortition cuts out the middlemen and gives samples of regular people the resources and time to understand the issues, find solidarity with each other, and solve their common problems. We're demanding that our state legislators call the People's Convention, an Article 5 U.S. constitutional convention that will give short term representative samples of the people the power to shape our system of government and bypass politicians on a recurring basis. Because Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution gives every state legislature an equal say in calling a constitutional convention, we don't need you to go to D.C. or a swing state to participate in direct, meaningful national activism. We need you just where you are, working in person with your communities to build this movement. The necessity of sortition. For many of us, it is difficult to connect the negative associations we have with politicians to the elections that elevate them and shape their behavior, because many of us see elections as the only method of scaling up democracy. If our goal with democracy is governing in the way that most people want, elections are the wrong tool. In fact, election and elite share a historical root word. Elections are a tool of aristocracy, not democracy. They are based on a worldview that elites have a right to use the power that all of us create to pursue their own visions. At small scales, people agree what democracy is. Everyone in the group gets an equal say in group decisions. As the number of people increases, or the number and complexity of decisions increases, including all people in all decisions becomes impractical and then impossible. Beyond this point, we need techniques to adapt democracy to scale. From ancient Athens up until the American Revolution, political thinkers understood that sortition was the way to scale up democracy, not elections, because chance is unbiased, while elections produce distorted bodies of decision makers. This distortion begins with the type of person who runs for office. First, people who run for office are less likely to need to work or caregive. If they work or caregive at all, they can interrupt these activities for long stretches to campaign or serve. Second, people who run for office are more likely to be outgoing and to see themselves as worthy of making decisions on behalf of other people, increasing the proportion of them that are narcissistic or sociopathic. This already distorted population of candidates is then further distorted by the campaign process. First, partisan primaries advance candidates with partisan policies. Second, people who have culturally preferred appearances or names are more likely to advance. Third, people who are wealthy or indebted to wealthy people have a better chance of winning because more money can pay for more effective campaigns. Finally, the people who end up holding office are influenced by their desire to maintain their positions. As they say, power corrupts. Experience has shown that we can't rely on groups of decision makers that don't include people like us to act in our best interests. We aren't naive enough to believe that when our interests diverge from those of these representatives, politicians can be relied upon to unilaterally compromise in our favor. With these problems in mind, it is not reasonable to hope to reform elections in a way that will eliminate a political ruling class unless we first eliminate all other class divisions. For example, if all people had true equality of opportunity from birth and had the time and resources necessary to run and serve as politicians at any point in their lives. Expecting to get the will of the people by asking us to pick between factions of elites every couple of years is out of touch with reality. We, the people, are what's for dinner. Elections just decide how we're cooked. From where we stand now, for all practical purposes, a system based on elections is inconsistent with democracy. But shouldn't experts make the decisions? Should the pilot decide the destination or the passengers? The passengers hire the pilot for expertise in getting them where they want to go. Experts should be on tap, not on top. Besides, are politicians necessarily experts in anything other than campaigning? How can we ensure randomly selected people act in the best interests of all of us? There are several ways. First, maintaining and enforcing anti-corruption rules. Second, ensuring every person has an equal chance of being selected and an equal opportunity to serve by paying them a reasonable wage, paying for necessary dependent care, and requiring that employers give them time off, just like for jury duty. Third, ensuring people only serve for enough time to make an informed decision on a single question to prevent them from being distorted by prolonged distinction in power. Fourth, using decision-making techniques designed to reach the greatest consensus possible. Fifth, dividing decision-making functions by drawing different short-term random samples for deciding the procedural rules, setting the agenda or advancing petitions from the people, crafting agenda items or petitions into concrete policy proposals, deciding whether proposals become law, and evaluating, hiring, and firing executive staff. Sixth, ensuring the sample sizes for the final steps of any decision, for example, passing a proposed law or hiring and firing key executives, are large enough to be representative of the general population. Seventh, ensuring every person, not corporation, has an equal opportunity to petition or influence the government. Won't this massively increase the time and effort of governing? The inefficiency and corruption of the status quo is very expensive for we the people. Sortition can be made more efficient by delegating powers to executive staff, experts hired to serve as department heads, for example, so long as the performance of these executives can be adequately monitored. The task of monitoring powerful individuals seems far better suited to representative samples of people equipped with the time, resources, and data to perform thorough, regularly scheduled reviews than to the general electorate, composed of individuals with many competing priorities and little hope of personally deciding the outcome, voting only every few years. Why we must have recurring sortition-based constitutional conventions. Any governing system, whether it's Congress or an algorithm, must answer to the people it rules over, or the people will be slaves. Temporary representative samples of the people, given the resources to wisely use and delegate our power, should hold the exclusive right to fundamentally reshape government if it is to be truly of, by, and for us. We believe a nonviolent political and civil resistance movement to call recurring sortition-based Article 5 U.S. constitutional conventions is the best approach to reach that goal. Calling an Article 5 convention has never been done. With such a difficult path before us, it makes sense to consider alternatives. There isn't a valid way to know with certainty what the best approach for making fundamental political changes will be, because no moment in history is identical to any other. That being said, here are our responses to common questions about this strategy. Why work within the US political system? The US has the largest single economy in the world. Its currency, technology, media, and military are all dominant. A lot of currently powerful individuals and groups depend on maintaining the US political system. Because a near-term complete collapse of the US seems unlikely and would be unpredictable, paths that rely on this happening are too risky in our opinion. Why sortition? Why not focus our efforts on economic equality before political equality? Examples across history demonstrate that even massive shifts towards economic equality are temporary. Class divisions quickly reemerge among the political elite. True political equality has not been achieved in modern history. We believe that sortition is the solution that will bring about lasting economic justice, because no political elite can entrench itself with random selection. Why not work through Congress to pass amendments? Congressional amendments have to filter through Congress, where politicians are more insulated from interactions with regular people, and much larger sums of money are required to have an impact. Trying to unseat an obstructive member of Congress would be much more challenging than unseating an obstructive state legislator. Additionally, we suspect that state legislators, many of whom only serve part-time, are more likely to share our position that the federal government needs an overhaul than members of Congress, who hold power within that system. Why not start with a state constitution? So many of the problems with how our government functions can only be dealt with at the federal level. The 14th Amendment provides a blueprint for how the U.S. Constitution can change the relationships that states have with the people who live under them. We believe focusing our efforts on the U.S. Constitution will give us the best chance to win a stable democracy for all of us with the least duplication of effort. Why not start smaller with a ballot initiative reform bill or a House of the Citizens? We don't see any advantages in delaying work on our ultimate goal. Although we welcome any plan to thoughtfully use sortition to empower people, it is unacceptable for the endpoint to be sortition assemblies with equal or lesser power than politicians. We are proposing an entirely different paradigm for democracy based on empowering samples of regular people to find consensus and solve their common problems. In no way should contestants from a corrupt system of elite popularity contests share that power. We must give sortition processes the highest authority within government, the exclusive right to shape constitutions and bypass politicians on a recurring basis. We need the People's Convention. How can you help? 1. Talk with people about sortition. Join Democracy Without Elections or other nonprofits dedicated to spreading the word. Read The Trouble with Elections by Terry Parishus, or similar books. Consider reading as a group or buying copies for libraries. If everyone realized that elections serve elites, not regular people, and that there is a better alternative, we would be most of the way to our goal. 2. Advocate for the use of sortition in organizations you are a part of. This is a great way to familiarize people with the idea of sortition and develop hands-on expertise within your organizations to attempt even more ambitious implementations. 3. Ask that when your local government convenes committees to get public input or make rules, that these committees are based on sortition, so they get input from all walks of life, not just those with the most motivation or time. 4. Work to convince activist groups that sortition is the fundamental reform that makes all other worthwhile reforms possible. Organize activists to demand issues be resolved with citizens' assemblies. Politicians are more able to ignore calls for change when activists are divided on what solutions to try, and those who benefit from the status quo are united in preventing change. If we collectively demand that decisions be made by citizens' assemblies, it will increase the likelihood we get beneficial changes, it will give the resulting policies more legitimacy, and it will spread the word about how we should scale democracy. 5. Help us call the People's Convention. What's the plan? To achieve a government truly of, by, and for the people, we will need support comparable to the largest political movements in history. For this purpose, we must welcome people from all backgrounds, reject violence, and openly lay out our strategy. If you believe that the people should rule themselves, we're counting on you to add your strength. 1. Ask your state legislators to call the People's Convention, in person if possible. 2. Show up in large numbers at state legislative hearings. 3. Hold town halls, regardless of whether state legislators agree to attend, to raise local awareness of sortition and contrast the legislature's work with local people's priorities. These could be solicited via Polis or similar accessible open source consensus finding tools. 4. Support volunteers willing to run against incumbents who oppose our campaign. 5. Register voters and explicitly discuss the benefits of registering as the dominant party in your state, regardless of ideology. 6. Disrupt party chokeholds by mobilizing unexpected groups to participate in the caucuses and primaries of the dominant party in your state. 7. Publicly discuss and use vote splitting and other legal election design vulnerabilities to our advantage. 8. Get yourself and your communities ready to support a general strike by storing emergency food, water, and other resources in case political elites subvert the process. For the marches. When the people rule, it's called sortition, democracy without politicians. Elections are for elites, assemblies are for all of us. Politicians aren't the people. They do not deserve our trust. No, we do not want the idle rich to speak for all of us. We, the people, are not free if we are ruled by someone else. No, we all must share the burden of deciding for ourselves. So samples of the citizens must wield the people's power if we hope to have a government not over us, but ours. At the risk of boring you all to tears, I'm going to read the draft legislation, just so that you know what we're specifically asking legislators to do. The People's Convention. A bill. 4. An act to call an Article 5 Constitutional Convention and to specify the procedures for the same. Whereas the United States Constitution provides for the possibility of a constitutional convention to propose amendments to the Constitution, and whereas the current process for proposing and ratifying constitutional amendments does not adequately reflect the will of the people, and whereas the use of randomly selected citizens' assemblies has demonstrated improved public engagement and informed decision-making on complex issues, and whereas we, the people of the United States, demand a government of, by, and for the people, now, therefore, be it enacted by the legislature of the state of blank. Section 1. Findings. The legislature of the state of blank finds that a constitutional convention composed of randomly selected citizens and a ratification process utilizing citizens' assemblies in each state would more accurately reflect the will of the people and enhance public trust in the amendment process. Section 2. Call for a constitutional convention. The legislature of the state of blank hereby calls upon the Congress of the United States to convene a constitutional convention pursuant to Article 5 of the United States Constitution as soon as the constitutional threshold of states is reached, and every 5 years thereafter. Section 3. Procedures for the Constitutional Convention. The legislature of the state of blank instructs that the Constitutional Convention occur in the following stages. 1. A Rules Council of 50 randomly selected citizens shall decide the rules and procedures of the convention, and hire impartial facilitators for the subsequent stages. The citizens of the Rules Council must a. Be provided with training on critical thinking. B. Be provided with comprehensive information on the issues to be considered. C. Have opportunities to engage in public hearings and hear from experts, including those of their own choosing. D. Be afforded adequate time for deliberation and discussion. E. Use decision-making processes designed to reach the greatest consensus possible. 2. A public request for constitutional amendment proposals shall be published and publicized, followed by a period of public feedback solicited through an accessible, open-source consensus-finding tool such as Polis. 3. A review panel of 150 randomly selected citizens shall draft amendments based on the request for proposals, public feedback, and expert testimony. The citizens of the review panel must: A. Be provided with training on critical thinking. B. Be provided with comprehensive information on the issues to be considered. C. Have opportunities to engage in public hearings and hear from experts, including those of their own choosing. D. Be afforded adequate time for deliberation and discussion. E. Use decision-making processes designed to reach the greatest consensus possible. Section 5. Ratification of amendments. The legislature of the state of blank instructs that any amendments proposed by the Constitutional Convention be ratified by state ratifying conventions composed of randomly selected citizens of each state. Section 6. State ratifying conventions. The legislature of the state of blank instructs that state ratifying conventions: 1. Be composed of 400 randomly selected citizens of the state, selected through a fair and equitable process that ensures broad representation of the state's population by providing compensation for service, reasonable reimbursement for dependent care, and mandatory leave from employment. 2. Be provided with comprehensive information and education materials on the proposed amendments. 3. Hear testimony from experts and delegates from the Constitutional Convention, with equal time and budget provided to both supporters and opponents of the proposed amendments. 4. Be afforded adequate time for consideration and small group discussion. 5. Ratify or reject amendments based on secret ballot majority vote. Section 7. Legislative intent. This act expresses the strong desire of the blank legislature for a more representative and democratic process for amending the United States Constitution. Section 8. Severability. If any provision of this act is held to be invalid, such invalidity shall not affect other provisions of this act. Section 9. Effective date. This act shall take effect immediately upon passage and remain in effect until revoked. Thanks for taking the time to think about how we might make society and government fairer and serve regular people better. If you feel so inclined, we could totally use your help at Democracy Without Elections or Assemble America. See you out there.